Bostrom Ministries. Beginning January 2018, Bostrom Ministries engaged in a whole new assignment by entering the airwaves of the world. Don't miss Ken and Mary Bostrom Ministries Live.
Thank you for being with us today. This is our broadcast, United in Its Purpose broadcast, where Ken and I have the mandate to reach the lost, teach the found, preach the word, that we would all become united in His purpose. One thing, you may not like the disciplined life of sitting down and learning with somebody teaching, but if you look at what Jesus did, I'm not calling myself Jesus, but I'm calling myself one of His disciples. He taught, then He preached, then He healed. He had to teach, preach, heal. That order. A lot of people want to come to church, just pray for me, get me healed, I want to go home and get back into my life without God. They just want the healing. You know what? We need to learn. We need to understand God's way of doing and being right. And what I've been doing is I've been going over Kings of the Divided Kingdom, because history merely repeats itself. And so now we have, this is the last episode. There's been 15 episodes on Kings of the Divided Kingdom. This is the very last one. This is we've gone through 18 kings. Well, actually, first of all, we went through the 3 kings of the United Kingdom. Saul, 40 years, David, 40 years, Solomon, 40 years. And then in 925 BC, the kingdom divided. 10 kings in the upper kingdom called Israel, and the 2 tribes in the southern kingdom called Judah. That was in 925. In 722 BC, the northern kingdom ceased to exist, and all 10 tribes were scattered. They were known as the 10 lost tribes, and scattered throughout the world. And so now we just have Judah left. Now Judah was from 925 to 586 BC. And so we're down to the last 4 kings, and Jehoaz is one of the kings, and you can see that he reigned only 3 months. So let's look at him. Jehoaz was 23 years old when he inherited his throne. His reign in Jerusalem lasted 3 months. His mother was Hamatal, and she was Jeremiah's daughter. Now, women are only mentioned if there is actual purpose. And remember, Jeremiah was during the time in this time period, and when Jerusalem was falling, and she was one of his daughters, and he committed evil in eternal sight, just as his ancestors had done for him. So having a godly wife really didn't help him, because he didn't listen to him. And Pharaoh Necho put him in prison in Riblah in Hamath, so that he would no longer sit on the throne in Jerusalem. He forced a fee on Judah of 7,500 pounds of silver and 75 pounds of gold. Now, Jehoahaz's name means Jehovah has seized, but here it ended up that Pharaoh has seized him. And so his reign was only 3 months. The next one we have is Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim. They all kind of sound like, don't you? And so here, Jehoiakim, we find in, this is Josiah's oldest remaining son. Now let me go back here to Jehoahaz, that only reigned for 3 months. He was the youngest son of Josiah. Isn't that amazing? Why would you put the youngest son in charge? I don't know. But here we have Jehoiakim. He was 25 years old when he was given the throne by Necho. His reign in Jerusalem lasted 11 years. His mother, Zabika, daughter of Ruma, he committed evil in Eternal's eyes. He was just like his ancestors. So the son, he actually had two names. He was a son of Josiah. He was the oldest remaining son. And Josiah had named him Eliakim, which means God sets up. But when Pharaoh changed his name, he changed it to Jehoiakim, which means Jehovah raises up. Now this is very interesting to me. Why did Pharaoh name him another Hebrew name? Are you wondering that? I wonder that because remember when Joseph was taken to Egypt with Pharaoh, Pharaoh gave him a whole nother name, and it was named after his gods. See, the Hebrew people have a name after God, after Jehovah God, but you know the other nations don't worship Jehovah God, so they would give them an Egyptian name after their gods. But here, Pharaoh changed his name and gave him another Hebrew name, which was, one says God sets up, and the other one Jehovah raises up. You know, to me that's really kind of, it stumped me, like why in the world would that have happened? And one thing about him, he only did evil in the sight of the Lord. The book of Jeremiah gives the most information about this disastrous leader. Oh my goodness. Jeremiah faithfully brought forth the word of the Lord, but Jehoiakim rejected anything he brought. You know, God, if you look at these kings that divide a kingdom, God had prophets for every single one of them. Every single one of them. All the prophets in the Bible, they're from all of these. They were raised up to help the king, to give the word of the Lord to the king. Why? Because God loved the nation so much. He wanted the people to prosper, be in health, even as their soul prospers. But what do you do when a king refuses to listen to the prophet? Another prophet named Uriah, Shemaiah, was killed by Jehoiakim. And we find that in Jeremiah. And Jehoiakim was taken to Babylon as a prisoner, but instead he was put to death. He wasn't just put in prison. They thought, we're just going to put him to death. Josephus records, Nebuchadnezzar had Jehoiakim's body tossed over Jerusalem's wall in an open field. And Jeremiah foretold his death in Jeremiah 22:18 through 19, and I'm going to read that to you. So this is what the Eternal says regarding Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Eternal One, upon his death, no one in his family will weep and say, "Oh, my brother, oh, my sister, our loved one is gone." Nor will any subjects weep and say, "Our leader is gone, our great king is gone." No, he will be buried like a dead donkey, his body dragged away and dumped outside Jerusalem gates in a trash heap. This is what happened to Jehoiakim. Now the next one, Jehoiachin, another 3-month person, king. So here's Jehoiachin. 2 Kings 24:8. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he inherited the throne. His reign in Jerusalem lasted 3 months, and here again they give his mother's name. The reason he gives his mother's name is that he was half brother to the other king right before him, so shows the one that they were full brothers to. It's like the tribes. They had some that were brothers, but they were half brothers because some had Leah for a mother, some had Rachel had for a mother, some had one of the handmaids. And so he is a son of Jehoiakim. He's a grandson of Josiah. King Nebuchadnezzar ravaged Judah and took him prisoner to Babylon, along with his entire household in 597 BC. This is when Daniel and his 3 friends were taken to Babylon. You know, Jeremiah 22:28 through 30, remember he prophesied a lot about Jehoiachin, these last kings. And Jeremiah prophesied that none of Jehoiachin's descendants would ever sit on the throne of Israel, and none did. He was king 3 months, and none of his descendants ever reigned. The prophets during this time were Jeremiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel. So none of them really were, this was not a good, happy time. 2 Kings 24:16 says that the king of Babylon also forced 7,000 warriors, 1,000 craftsmen, and artisans into exile into Babylon. So they came in and captured many in Jerusalem, but this wasn't the end of Jerusalem because we have one more king left. But this is when Daniel was taken, Ezekiel was taken, this is Jeremiah was stayed back in Jerusalem, was prophesying, and these were, a lot of the bad things were happening and taken into exile. But the city of Jerusalem was still there until this last king. And his name was Zedekiah. He is the 19th king of Israel. There was 19 wicked kings in Israel, and there was 19 kings of Judah, but 8 of them were good, 11 were evil. Zedekiah, however, was one of the evil ones. So let's learn about him. 2 Kings 24:17. Nebuchadnezzar then appointed Jehoiachin's uncle Mattaniah to take his place as king, and Nebuchadnezzar gave Mattaniah a new name, Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 23 when he became king and reigned 11 years. He was a full brother of King Jehoahaz. Here's another one that really, I was wondering why they did. Remember when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken into captivity? They changed their names. They changed their names, all 3 of them. And Mattaniah was his given name, and it means a gift of Jehovah. But the Nebuchadnezzar changed it to Zedekiah, which is another Hebrew name, and it means Jehovah is righteous. And so why did they change the names over there, but they didn't change the king's name? Isn't that interesting? I actually wrote to the professor of biblical studies in Florida that I converse with, and asked him, do you know why they didn't change their names to that kind of name? Anyway, that's just me. And Nebuchadnezzar executed his sons, Zedekiah's sons, in front of him. They cut his eyes out, his eyes were blinded, and was taken to Babylon in chains, and he died in prison. That was the last king of Israel. And when that happened, they totally conquered Israel. Now, they conquered Israel was the most amazing day that they did. And it actually, both of the temples, the Temple of Solomon was totally taken down on the 9th day of the month of Av. It's called Tisha B'Av. It's the saddest day on the entire Hebrew calendar, because in 9th of Av in 586 BC, the Solomon's temple was totally destroyed. And in 70 AD, the temple that Azariah, Nehemiah, and others had rebuilt the temple. It was taken down in 70 AD. And there has not been another Jerusalem since then, until 1948. And so 1967 actually was when they actually got Jerusalem back. Now, there's 5 specific things that occurred on the 9th of Av that according to the Mishnah, which is the Tanit 4:6. These things happen. And sometimes it creates, when you do something, it creates a pattern of something to repeat itself every year. The 12 spies returned from spying out the promised land, and the entire nation believed the report of the evil spies, and they stayed in the wilderness for 40 years. That was, that's in the book of Exodus and Numbers. And, they sent the 12 spies into the promised land, and 10 spies came back and said, oh my goodness, there are giants in the land. They are too big for God. We can't take God. We can't take that. They're just, look at the size of these grapes. And there were giants. They were Nephilim. They were from the fallen angels that had come, been with the women and created giants. And so they had to work with the fruits and everything so that the giants could be fed. And so they carried one cluster of grapes. It took 2 men with a pole to carry one cluster of grapes. They had done so much to the seed to make them giant. It's happening now too these days. Anyway, Joshua and Caleb said, it's not too much for God. Our God's given us the land. We're going to go over there and we're going to take it because God has given us the land. But you know what? The people believed the bad report instead of the report of the Lord. And so they had to stay in the wilderness for 40 years because the spies had been in spying out the land for 40 days. So 40 days, 40 years, 1 day for every year. So the first temple was built by Solomon, was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 587. Some say 587, some say 586. I'm not going to fight about it. The second temple built by Ezra and Nehemiah was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, scattering all the Jews throughout the world not to have their homeland back until 1948. Well, actually they did, but they were under Roman power. During the time of Jesus, they were back in their land, but it was under such Roman power. But they got their own land back in 1948. They did for a season there. So here we go. In 135 AD, the Romans crushed Bar Kokhba's revolt and destroyed the city of Betkar, killing 500,000 people. Now, the interesting thing is, they killed 500,000 people, but they would not allow the Jewish people to bury the dead. And that was on the 9th of Av. But on the 14th of Av, it's called actually Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av it's called. And on that day, they allowed them to go out and bury the 500,000 Jews that had died. But the amazing miracle of that whole thing is the bodies had not corrupted. It was like the same day they died. They weren't stinky. They were amazing. Following that Bar Kokhba event, the Roman commander Rufus plowed the site of the Temple of Jerusalem and surrounded the area. They plowed it under with salt so nothing would ever grow there. They purposely destroyed the land in Jerusalem so that something could not grow there. This year in 2021, the 9th of Av, you're going to want to put this on your calendar, is Sunday, July 18th, beginning at and it begins a 25-hour of fast, and it ends at sundown July 17th. On July 19th, sorry. The end of the book of Lamentations is read around the world that day as they fast. Now, it's not just the kings that sinned. Here's sins of the people, and I have the references to it. I hope you can see it. They did not keep the sabbatical year. They did not keep the 7 years. Jeremiah puts that even the people, even if the king didn't do it, they could have obeyed God and trusted God, but they didn't let their land rest every year, every 7th year. It's called a Shemitah year. And so Jeremiah records that they had to be in Babylon for 70 years to let the land rest. That means the entire 490 years of all the kings, never did they let their land rest. They continued to work the land. They did not listen to the prophets. They burned sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven. Judah sinned more than Israel. Now that surprised me when I started looking at that. God said that when Judah sinned, it was more than Israel, and their sins were great. They forgot God. They ignored God's law. These are sins of the people. They despised God's Sabbath and feast. It hasn't been until the last 2 years that I understand about breaking the commandment of remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, keep it different, keep it separate. Doesn't mean you have to go all day long, and worship and pray and stuff. No, you're supposed to rest. Sometimes intense study and intense praying and stuff, it ends up you being tired afterwards, and God wants you to have a day of rest. You do pray, you do worship, you do honor the Lord, but why is it not okay to break any of the other commandments? My husband and I will refuse to have an R-rated movie on our TV because of the language and taking God's name in vain. And why is it okay not to break that commandment? Why is it not okay to, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder? But then why is it okay then to break the Sabbath and just continue to work yourself 7 days a week and continue just to do whatever you want and not treat the Sabbath as holy unto the Lord? That's one thing that I have discovered in the last couple of years. I probably need to do another teaching on that. But they ignored God's laws, they despised God's Sabbath and His feasts. Even now, the people would rather follow the feasts of the world that have no Bible basis for it than the feasts of the Lord, the fixed appointed time on God's calendar. Once you start following the fixed appointed time on God's calendar, your whole life falls into the rhythm of God's timing. You fall into the rhythm of God's timing. They imposed heavy rent on the poor and they trampled the needy. They cheated with dishonest scales. God has a lot to say about dishonest scales. They enslaved their neighbors. They despised justice and perverted justice with bribes. They had bloodshed. They had idolatry. They burnt sons on the fire of idols. They closed the door of the temple and offered no sacrifices to God. They built high places and established priests for them. They had total lack of restraint. They had immorality. They had apathy for God amidst prosperity. They plot iniquity. You know what that's called? Lawlessness. And in the Bible it says we're going to have lawless times are going to be coming. And that is what is happening now in this land. We have got to stand up and say something. You have to take a stand. Even like those pastors in Cheyenne in California that said, no, we're not going to close. You're not going to arrest me for having church. Took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Why did they call a lot of things essential, but church is not essential? Why did they allow protesters and burning down buildings and no masks on there, no social distancing? But it's okay, but we don't want you to go to church. You can tell that whole thing is demonic. And up in Canada, that Pastor Arthur that was taken out of his car and pulled and handcuffed and dragged to the police car. Why? For having church. Because the Muslim mayor did not want them to have church. I think the Muslims were still allowed to worship up there, but the Christians could not. Don't think this is not going to happen, because we have come into those times that the Lord was warning us about, that the New Testament was warning, the times of lawlessness. And here we have Planned Parenthood in Houston, Texas, the largest abortion clinic, murdering building in the Western Hemisphere, outside of China. China has something bigger. But the Christian, we have a Houston Coalition for Life, focuses prayer outside the largest abortion facility in Western Hemisphere, the Planned Parenthood on I-45. I-45. Isn't that Cyrus? And that's one thing, two different things about the current president. The President 45, when he came into power, the first thing he did was started coming against abortion and saying, let my people go, let these babies live. And the first thing that the 46th president did, one of the first things he did was outdo every single thing that number 45 had done. It sounds like the kings of the divided kingdom, doesn't it? It sounds like the kings of the divided kingdom. And where is the church in all of this, Houston? You know, one of the biggest churches in Houston will not say anything against when they had the gay mayor, the fourth largest city in the United States. When they had the gay mayor that subpoenaed I think they subpoenaed either 7 or 5 churches, and then they had the 5 pastors that rose up against it and say, no, we're not going to let you do that. And they got help, and they were able to overturn. You cannot subpoena every single thing, all our notes, all our sermons. You know, sermons are all telecast and everything, but they wanted everything from the computer. They wanted all our texts. They wanted all our emails, everything they had, they wanted. And so why were the churches of some of the largest churches, why were they silent? It's the same thing. Why were they silent in the Bible when all of those other kings came into power and tried to do everything that was of God? You know what? You need to pray. You need to vote. You need to speak up. You need to be bold and courageous. You need to be able to speak the truth. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You know what? I'm more afraid in holy reverential fear of the Lord than I am of the evil that's upon this earth today. You can't threaten me with death. You cannot threaten me. No weapon formed against me will prosper. Remember Hezekiah. In these days, remember Hezekiah. Renew your strength. Rise up with wings as eagles. Run and not be weary. God bless you. Bye-bye.